Most people assume that isolation produces decline. When a community seals itself off from the internet, from television, from secular culture, from the rhythms and pressures of modern life, the expectation is that it withers. The shops close, the young people leave, the population ages and thins. Everyone knows this. It is the story of hundreds of small communities across the Western world. It is what decline looks like. But the fastest growing village in the state of New York belongs to a community that has done all of these things. More completely and more consistently than almost any other group in America, they have chosen separation. And they are not declining. In Kiryas Joel, Orange County, New York, the largest single age group in the village is children under 5. There are more than 7,000 of them. They make up nearly 1/5 of the entire population. More than half of all residents are under 18. The village grew 63% in a single decade, from just over 20,000 people to nearly 33,000. Every child born here has grown up without a smartphone, without a television set, without a secular school curriculum that competes with the one their community provides. The outside world calls this isolation. The community calls it something else entirely. On a weekday morning in Kiryas Joel, the streets carry a warmth that most American suburbs have lost. Most suburban streets at this hour are empty. Adults have driven to work. Children have been bused to regional schools. The houses stand sealed and quiet. Here, the streets are full. Boys in white shirts and dark trousers walk in pairs toward the yeshiva on Garfield Road. Girls in modest dresses pass them going the other direction. A woman opens her front door and exchanges a few words with her neighbor on the pavement below. An older man sits outside the synagogue with a book open in his lap. This village was built from undeveloped land in the Catskill foothills beginning in the 1970s. It has the texture and density of a 19th century Eastern European town pressed into a 21st century county map. And it is not the only one. In Borough Park and Crown Heights in Brooklyn, in Lakewood in Ocean County, New Jersey, in Muncie in Rockland County, Hasidic families are raising 5, 7, 10 children. Communities that numbered in the tens of thousands a generation ago now number in the hundreds of thousands. They are growing faster than any secular community in America. The question that sits at the center of all of this is not why they chose to separate themselves. The question is whether separation is even the right word for what they have done. The Hasidic world as it exists in America today was built almost entirely by survivors. This is not a metaphor. When Grand Rebbe Yoel Teitelbaum arrived in New York in late 1946, he had escaped the Holocaust via the Kastner train in 1944, which allowed passengers to exit to Switzerland before he eventually moved to the United States. He had led a community of tens of thousands of Jews in the Transylvanian town of Satu Mare. In the spring of 1944, most of them had been loaded onto trains bound for Auschwitz. He watched this happen. He spent the rest of his life deciding what it meant. The conclusion he drew was one that most of his contemporaries found extreme. Assimilation had not saved European Jews. Integration into secular culture had not protected them. The communities that had modernized, that had adopted the language and dress and habits of the surrounding culture in the hope of acceptance, these communities had been destroyed alongside the ones that had not. The lesson Teitelbaum drew was that the only protection was distinctiveness. He did not see separation as retreat. He saw it as the lesson of history, written in the blood of the people he had led. Rabbi Moshe Friedman, a Satmar scholar who has written extensively on Teitelbaum's theology, has described the Rebbe's position with precision. He has said that Teitelbaum understood what each generation of assimilated European Jewry had failed to understand. Every group that sought to dissolve into the surrounding culture had, within 2 or 3 generations, ceased to exist as Jews. The Rebbe was not afraid of modernity itself. He was afraid of disappearance. He had watched disappearance happen in a single season. Teitelbaum went north into the Catskills in 1974. He found land that nobody else wanted, a stretch of forest and abandoned farmland in Orange County, 55 miles from Manhattan. He called it Kiryas Joel. He designed it from the beginning not as a place where his community would live alongside the world, but as a place built entirely around the requirements of his community's way of life. Streets were laid out so that the main synagogue stood at the center. Residences radiated outward within walking distance. Schools, a mikveh, bakeries, and butchers were constructed before most of the houses. The infrastructure came first. The community grew around it like a tree growing around its own roots. The same logic had driven Aaron Kotler to Lakewood, New Jersey, 31 years earlier. Kotler had led a yeshiva in the Belarusian town of Kletsk. Most of his 300 students had perished in the Holocaust. He arrived in the United States in 1943, carrying 14 surviving students and an idea that most Jewish leaders in America considered delusional. He wanted to build a kollel, a center of advanced Torah study for married men, in a country where the entire cultural pressure was to work, to assimilate, to become American. He chose Lakewood because it was quiet, overlooked, affordable, and close enough to New York City to draw young scholars. He founded Beth Midrash Govoha in a single modest building. The influential sociologist Marshall Sclair wrote in 1955 that the history of Orthodox Judaism in the United States could be understood as a story of institutional decay. He believed it was a tradition that would quietly disappear in the New World. As of 2025, Beth Midrash Govoha enrolls over 9,000 full-time male students across 74 affiliated institutions. It is one of the largest post-secondary institutions of any kind in the state of New Jersey. Lakewood itself has grown from 38,000 residents in 1980 to more than 135,000 today. Marshall Sclair was wrong in a way that deserves close attention. The mechanism that produced this growth is not wealth. It is not political influence, though the community has acquired some. It is religious law. The Jewish Sabbath, Shabbat, runs from Friday at sundown to Saturday night. For those 25 hours, observant Jews cannot drive, cannot use electricity, cannot carry objects in a public space. The only exception is when a symbolic boundary called an ERUV encloses the neighborhood. The ERUV is a length of wire strung between poles and posts, a border drawn in the air. Everything a family needs must exist within walking distance. The synagogue, the school, the kosher grocery, the mikveh, the bakery. This single requirement produces, entirely by accident and without any urban planner's intention, exactly what urban planners have spent decades and billions of dollars trying to engineer. Dense, walkable, mixed-use communities where people pass each other on foot every single week. Where the baker knows the school teacher and the school teacher knows the rabbi. Where the rabbi knows which families are struggling and which families have something to give. The yeshiva sits at the center like a gravity well. Young men come to study. They marry, they stay. Their children fill the schools. New families arrive to be near the institutions. About 1,000 new families move to Lakewood every single year. The numbers that govern life inside these communities run against almost every trend in modern American society. Across the United States, social isolation is at a historic high. Roughly 1 in 4 Americans now reports having no close friends at all. Rates of depression and anxiety among young adults have risen every year for the past 15 years. Marriage rates are at their lowest point since records began. Birth rates have fallen below replacement level in every state. None of them apply inside Hasidic communities. The birth rate in Kiryas. Joel is the highest recorded for any American states, an average of 6.7 children per woman. Marriage rates approach 100% among adults. The Tamchai Shabbos network in Lakewood alone delivers Sabbath food packages to more than 1,250 families every week. Dedicated drivers load their cars each Thursday afternoon and fan out across the township. By Friday, every box has reached its destination. A driver who has been making that run for more than a decade describes the work simply. He says every box means another family has what it needs for Shabbos. The dignity of the process, he has said, is the point. The school day for boys in the Satmar Yeshiva system begins early and runs long. Younger children study the Hebrew alphabet and the weekly Torah portion. Older boys are already deep in Talmud, the ancient legal and ethical discussions that have been studied in paired conversation, two students facing each other across a shared text for more than 15 centuries. The sound inside the Beit Midrash is unlike anything in a university library. It is the sound of 200 simultaneous conversations happening at once. A low, sustained roar of debate that occasionally rises into something louder when two students disagree about a point of law, and then settles again. Girls learn separately in their own schools that line the quieter residential streets. Their curriculum carries both religious texts and a range of secular subjects that varies by school and by the strictness of the family's affiliation. A teacher who has taught at one of the Satmar girls' schools for more than 20 years has said that the question she hears most often from visitors is whether her students feel restricted. She says she always gives the same answer. The girls in her classroom, she has said, are not asking the questions that outsiders assume they must be asking. They know who they are, they know where they belong. That certainty, she has said, is rarer than it sounds. By 2 in the afternoon on Friday, the acceleration is visible everywhere. The butcher shop has a queue that extends out onto the pavement. Fathers who have been in the study hall since early morning make their way home. They shower. They change into their Shabbos clothes, a heavier coat, a fur-trimmed shtreimel hat for the married men of many Satmar families. That hat was worn by Polish and Hungarian noblemen in the 18th century. Hasidic Jews adopted it as formal dress and have worn it ever since, uninterrupted, through 2 centuries of revolution and migration and catastrophe. By 4 o'clock, the smell of cholent drifts from windows across the neighborhood. Cholent is the slow-cooked Sabbath stew that was placed on the fire before sundown Friday and will not be touched again until after the synagogue service on Saturday morning. Its smell in a Hasidic neighborhood on a Friday afternoon is so particular and so consistent that it functions almost as an announcement. The house is ready, the table is set, the week is nearly done. Then the candles are lit. A woman stands at her kitchen table with her eyes closed and her hands moving in slow circles above 2 lit flames. This gesture is the same one her mother made and her grandmother before her. It goes back through generations and across continents, through towns in Hungary and Poland and Belarus that no longer exist as Jewish towns, through a world that was destroyed and rebuilt and is now here, in a village in the foothills of the Catskills, alive and lit. Saturday morning in Kiryas Joel, the streets are without cars. Families walk to synagogue in clusters, fathers and sons moving together, mothers and daughters a little behind or ahead. The sound of the community on Shabbat morning is shoes on pavement and the voices of children and nothing else. Inside the main Satmar synagogue, the morning service runs for 3 hours. Men stand and sit and sway in the pattern of prayer that their fathers and their fathers' fathers used in synagogues on the other side of the ocean. After the service, families make their way home. The Shabbat meal runs long. Cholent is served. Songs are sung. The same melodies pass from father to son for generations. They originated in the court of the Baal Shem Tov in 18th century Podolia. They arrived in Orange County, New York, entirely intact. In many homes, guests at the Shabbat table are not the exception, but the expectation. The Hasidic tradition of Haknasas Orkim means welcoming strangers and guests as a matter of obligation. A family may sit down with people they barely know for a meal that stretches 3 hours. There are no screens competing for attention. There is nowhere else to be. Gitty Grunwald is a Satmar woman from Kiryas Joel, who has written about her experience of Shabbat for English language readers. She has described the hours between the afternoon prayer and the end of the Sabbath as the most valuable hours of her week. She has said that it is the only time in modern life when there is genuinely nowhere else to be. No screen is asking for her attention. No obligation is waiting. Outsiders often assume this must feel like confinement, she has written. She says it feels like the opposite. It feels, she has said, like the only hour of the week when she is entirely present in her own life. The most striking thing about walking through Kiryas Joel or Borough Park on a weekday afternoon is not the distinctive dress or the absence of technology. It is the children. They are everywhere. On scooters along the pavement, at windows calling down to friends below, running in groups that span several years of age in the way that children played before organized schedules replaced unstructured time. A pediatrician who has worked in Kiryas Joel for more than a decade has said that the community's health outcomes consistently confound the standard correlations between income and childhood well-being. Household incomes in the village are modest, but the doctor has noted that rates of behavioral disorders, social anxiety, and childhood depression in his patient population are strikingly low. He attributes this carefully to the density and stability of the social environment. Children here are rarely alone. They are rarely unsupervised for long. They are rarely uncertain about who they are or where they belong. That stability, he has said, appears to have effects that money cannot easily replicate. Everything described so far is real. It is also incomplete. The same community that produces this depth of social cohesion also produces a specific and acute difficulty for anyone who finds themselves unable to live within its boundaries. The Hasidic world is not a gentle place to leave. When a young man or woman from Kiryas Joel decides that they cannot sustain the life they were raised in, the losses are not theoretical. They may lose daily contact with their parents. They may lose their siblings. They may lose the childhood friends who constitute their entire social world. They may have received an education that prepared them entirely for life inside the community and only partially for life outside it. Their secular academic qualifications may be limited. Their English may be uncertain. Their knowledge of how to navigate a world built around smartphones and credit histories and medical insurance forms may be close to zero. The organization Footsteps, founded in 2001 and based in New York City, exists specifically to support people making this transition. Over 2 decades, it has worked with more than 2,000 individuals who have left ultra-Orthodox communities. Its staff describe cases of people in their 20s and 30s encountering basic tasks for the first time. Opening a bank account, applying for a job, sitting for a high school equivalency examination. For those who make the transition, it is often described as the loneliest period of their lives. Shalem Dean left the Skverer Hasidic community of New Square in his 30s. He had been raised there, married there, and had built a life within its borders. He has spoken publicly about the nature of what he lost. He has said that he did not leave because the community was cruel. He left because he could no longer believe what the community required him to believe. And once that belief was gone, there was no longer a version of the life he had been living that remained available to him. The belonging and the belief were not separable, he has said. You could not have one without the other. That inseparability is the community's greatest strength, and it is also its sharpest edge. The most contested ground between these communities and the secular state is the question of what children are taught. New York state law requires private schools to provide instruction substantially equivalent to public schools in core subjects including mathematics, science, and English. A series of investigations published between 2015 and 2022 documented that a significant number of Hasidic yeshivas, particularly those serving boys, provided minimal secular instruction. Some boys graduated with limited English literacy and with exposure to mathematics that extended little beyond basic arithmetic. The community's response was not a denial of the facts. It was a defense of the premise. Community leaders argued that the state had no authority to dictate the content of a religious education. They argued that their graduates found employment within the community, and that secular academic metrics were simply the wrong measure of a good life. The argument had coherent internal logic. It was also largely unpersuasive to anyone reasoning from outside that framework. New York State reached an agreement with yeshiva operators in 2024, establishing clearer oversight mechanisms. The underlying tension has not been resolved. There is also the question of how this community is seen. Hasidic life has become the subject of intense attention from documentary filmmakers, journalists, and television producers. The Netflix series Unorthodox was based on the memoir of Deborah Feldman, a Satmar woman who left Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and rebuilt her life in Berlin. It was watched by tens of millions of people in more than 190 countries. The community argues, with some justification, that the stories that travel outward are almost exclusively the stories of those who left, told from outside looking back. The stories of the millions who stayed, who consider their lives rich and full and well-chosen, rarely travel at all. That asymmetry is real. It shapes what is possible to know from the outside. Late Saturday afternoon in Kiryas Joel, in the last hour before the Sabbath ends, children who have been indoors since Friday sundown are beginning to drift back outside. On the main road, nothing moves. Inside the synagogue, the afternoon prayer is just concluding. The voices of the congregation carry through the stone walls and out into the street. In a few minutes, the Havdalah service will begin. A braided candle will be lit. A cup of wine will be raised. A spice box will be passed from hand to hand so that the sweetness of the Sabbath can be carried briefly into the week that is about to begin. This is the border. This is the moment the sacred and the ordinary change places. The children on the stoop look up as their father appears at the end of the street, still wearing his Shabbos coat. He calls to them. They run toward him. The ordinary week is coming back. It comes back every Saturday night. And every week, for 25 hours, it has been held at the boundary of a wire strung between fence posts, on the edge of a village built from scratch in a forest in the mountains by a man who believed the world his people had known could be rebuilt. And had to be. His great-grandchildren are the children on the stoop. The candle is lit. The week begins.